Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Book Leads Impactful Books for Life and Leadership. I'm your series host and leadership performance coach, John Giarmillo. This podcast series is about getting to the books that have impacted the lives of the people in my network. I want to find these great leads, have a talk with them, have a discussion, a conversation about getting to those books that have impacted them the most, that have impacted their work, their business, whatever it may be, all these lives that intersect, and grab that value from them that they can share. And I cover three categories of books in this series. The first category is a book that they're sharing with me that I haven't read. Second category is when we're covering a book we've both read, whether specifically for the series or in our past lives before the series. The third category is when we discuss the person's, and the person is an author and or publisher, and they want to get that message of their book out to the masses. This episode will be a little different, and you'll hear about that in a few seconds. My guest today is Aaliyah Miller, and Aaliyah is a storyteller and uses words as her superpower to help drive change for individuals and organizations. She wrote the script, I Am Muslim American, for Wharf Theater's New Haven Play Project. The film was a multimedia project funded by the Doris Duke Foundation to foster connections between Muslim and non-Muslim community members. The film is an official selection of the New York Liftoff Film Festival, the Pulling Focus African American Film Festival of the Quad Cities, and the International Black and Diversity Film Festival. The film has also received recognition awards from the Global Accolade Film Competition for the following film categories: African American Filmmaker, Islamic Filmmaker, Women Filmmaker, and Women Theme. And I met Aaliyah when we served on the board of the American Marketing Association Connecticut chapter. It was the summer of COVID when I joined. I think she joined shortly thereafter, and we worked together on the communications committee. So we were in charge of social media and everything that had to do with messaging. And when you work with certain people, you can tell how seriously they take messaging, how organized they are, the words that they want to use, the frequency with which they want to put out content. It was just very strong messaging. And we stayed in touch after I left the board after a year of service. And I'm active on LinkedIn. She and I are connected on LinkedIn. And I would see a couple months ago, she'd post about this particular film that we're going to talk about, or Screenplay. And she would talk about the accolades it was getting, or the premieres, or the awards. And I'm on LinkedIn regularly. I'm like, did I miss something? So I reached out to her and I asked her, what's your connection to this? Where is this in your sphere of your work? Like, what do you have to do with this? I think I might have missed something, but it sounds great. And she told me she wrote the screenplay. And shortly thereafter, I didn't hesitate. I wanted to have her on for a conversation. So this is a first for this series where we're going to talk about a screenplay. But I mean, essentially, they're so closely related, books and screenplays, obviously written. You're trying to get your values out there, what's important. You're trying to draw people into your story. You're trying to teach. You're trying to share. So it just makes sense that I would have her here for a conversation. So Aaliyah, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I feel very honored to be here, and it's good to see you.
I know, right? It's amazing how much you may interact and engage with people online, like on LinkedIn and whatnot. But yeah, we haven't seen each other in Jesus. Now it's like 3 years. So it is great to see you. I'm happy for you. I've seen everything that's been going on with the film since I started seeing those first couple posts. I'm glad I clarified and learned from you that it was your screenplay. I even told you, I'm like, you're not saying enough that you wrote this thing. Like, you got to get that out there. It's powerful. It's amazing. So congrats on everything that's been taking place.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, obviously we're talking a screenplay, but it's going to function just the same as any of the other episodes, where first I want to get a sense for who you are. Mm-hmm. So who are you today? What's the work that you do in the day-to-day? I know screenwriting isn't your full-time job, but what's that value that you're putting out there in the day-to-day?
Well, you kicked it off, and I'm a storyteller at heart. Been telling stories for 20 plus years. I went to school as a communications professional major, and I studied broadcast journalism, television, and film production. So that's always been a part and an interest of mine, and I would also definitely say a passion of mine. In recent years, though, it's a hard field to break through in, though, if I'm candid and honest. It takes a lot of hard work. And for me, I was able to, I've kind of dabbled in it in my early 20s. I did a lot of work on independent films, things along that. I dabbled in acting. So I've kind of done all that behind the scenes, did a couple off Broadway shows. And I would say, what I love about that and what I bring to what I do in my career today is the power of stories. And when you tell a really good story, how it can affect change for the things you do. Today, I'm a communications professional. I work for an organization called the Capital Region Council of Governments. We're based out of Hartford. We are the acronym is CROG. It's a council of government, which I will tell you before I got into that position. I actually didn't know what a council of government was, but we have 9 of them here in the state of Connecticut, and we work with elected officials to do everything from public safety, transportation, regional planning, economic development. So in my day-to-day, I'm helping that organization tell their story about the work that they do to really help improve the community, or I should say communities.
Yeah. Now, to understand how you got to where you are now, especially that love for storytelling, can you tell me a little, not a little, I always want to hear where somebody started, like your first steps into your career or education. What was it that guided you in that direction? And then what did that path look like to now?
Yeah, I think again, I've always sort of naturally been a performer. I've been involved in the arts all my life, going back to when I was 5 years old. Started out as a dancer and did that all the way up through. And again, I kind of got into this from the performance aspect. I like to perform. And then I want to say, I think in college, as I learned a lot about more communications, delved into communication theory, I started to think about and see and experience what was happening behind the scenes and how people helped to put that together. I took video production classes and really learned the aesthetic of how to tell stories for television, for the medium of film.
Mhm.
And as when I graduated school, I want to say, I still had that passion. And so I was still trying to do acting. But one of the things that I slowly realized was what you like about stories is the beginning, the middle, the end, and hopefully the payoff for the reader or the audience. And I just started writing. And I had kind of always been doing that too. I've been a writer as well. And I want to say, I think somewhere between 2003 and 2005, I did what most people I think do who are trying to figure things out. You read about it, you get books. I got a bunch of books on screenwriting and kind of, learn the basics, of the craft. But I still wasn't necessarily writing stories. I saw an ad in a paper, local paper at the time, and it was about a screenwriting workshop. And it was happening free. It was at the Brewster Library. I went to it, and it was a group of probably, I want to say, 8 of us. And the woman who taught that workshop, her name is Louisa Burns Bisnozio. She's my screenwriter mentor. I met her at that workshop, and she did a really good job. And her story resonated with me because she was a writer at late in her career. She was a teacher
Mm.
by trade, and once her kids were all grown up and she wanted to do something else, she tapped into writing, and she kind of shared that with us as well. And we all enjoyed the workshop. We all loved what she had to share. And she sort of said to us afterwards, who's here interesting in like writing and being a part of a workshop where we can meet at my house, and I you'll write your pages, you come back as a group, we'll share those pages. That's how I got started. I did that. I was with that group for probably 2 years, and that's where I learned how to write, and more importantly, learned how to listen, because you can't write without listening.
That's amazing. So, what, as you said, you talked about her story starting later in life. Obviously, the entertainment industry, whether it's acting, screenwriting, you've mentioned it's not easy to break into. So when you left college, I don't know if you went to graduate school or you went right into the workforce. What were you doing side by side as you were taking this screenwriting journey?
I was still at that time kind of trying to split and do a little bit of a side hustle. So sometimes there's a lot of different, I think, opportunities for creatives. So I want people to recognize that if it's not your full-time gig, there's a lot of different venues for you to still pursue your passion. And that's even how I came to this film as well, when we get to that later. But I was looking for like films, short films that were being made that I could work on the weekend and doing that, and also just still writing. So if I could PA for a film, which means be like a production assistant or a production coordinator, I did that. And again, slowly but surely, I was really still doing that, but more recognizing that I think where you're going to go with this is not necessarily producing, because that takes time, money, a lot of which I didn't have at the time, right? I went more all in on the writing, and I really focused on the writing. And around, I want to say 2000, and so in between then, I wrote some scripts. I wrote some short scripts. I put those out there in the world, and one specifically that I wrote at the time I was in my MFA program at WestCon. So I went to Western Connecticut State University has an MFA program that I highly recommend. And I like that program because one of the things that I was looking at the time that I was working, and still, I think at this time I was probably a public relations specialist with the Annie E. Casey Foundation at the time. But I was like, I knew I wanted to further hone my skills as a screenwriter. But a lot of the MFA programs at the time were in person. You had to like basically quit your job and study full time. And a lot of the more renowned programs were in cities like New York or LA. Well, I'm based here in Connecticut. I don't have the money nor the time to kind of completely quit and go and go off and do that. WestCon has this program that was online, and it's a professional writing program. So what was great about that program was that I could further and deepen my interest, relationships, my network as a screenwriter, and focus on that. But I can also look at a practical form of writing, which public relations, business writing, technical writing. So I could do both in that program. And for me, from a job perspective, it was great because my employer was able to reimburse a portion of that for me, because it wasn't just creative writing.
Yeah.
It was practical. And I will say, at the time, the program is about 20 years old now. I believe this year they're celebrating their 20th anniversary, which is great. And I would say, because it was online, and it's an intense online program, most of them are, but I didn't have kids at that time. I was able to do that and work, which was, it was a game changer for me. And again, that program put me in contact with people who are working in the field. So your teachers are actual screenwriters, your teachers are authors, your teachers are poets. So you have a built-in network. As part of my senior project, I wrote, directed, and produced a short film called After the Headlines. I'm actually looking at the poster because it's hanging in my office. That was my senior thesis project. And for me, I've had all this experience of working on other people's films, working on other people's projects. I said, I think I can write this script. The script was written. I had gotten it out there. It had gotten some screenwriting awards. So there was some traction around it. And I said, I need to do this senior project to get credit for. So I made the film. It was shot in Connecticut. I used my network of folks that I knew who worked on productions, and it was, oh my God, it was a shoestring project. I think I made it for probably less than 10,000, which I don't know if you can even do that today. And
I can't imagine. I can't imagine. Nope.
And
resourceful. I mean, that's the way you have to be, right?
Yeah. And again, it was a labor of love. I had some things that I had to do. Like, I think when you do and make films, you have to, when you can, pay your talent, pay the actors, even if it's not a lot of money, because it's their time and that's their profession. And like, there's certain positions that you're not gonna, if you don't pay, you're not going to get, you get what you pay for, as the saying goes. So like, your DP needs to be a paid position. Your AD, which is assistant director, needs to be paid. Your editor, and you kind of pay what you can. And again, I think the beauty of the creative and storytelling is when people believe in your vision, when they support what you are trying to say, they'll find a way to make it work for you. So I did that film and I got it out there. I put it in some film festivals, and it did a little bit of work. it got a little bit of recognition. I was proud of it. And I think as a creative, like you always go back and be like, oh, I wish I would have did this different. I wish this would have shot different. And I will say, I think every director has that. And I think one of the things that I learned from the process, because I financed it, I wrote it, and I directed it, is that when you wear too many hats, you're going to shortchange one thing. So from that process, I kind of learned to focus on one. Even if you can do all three, it's probably better to focus on one. And then I would say, just life catches up with you. I had some kids. I switched jobs. I was in between communication jobs at that time. And so I kind of more went all in on my communications career, and my screenwriting side between family and work went to the back burner. But it's one of those things that I don't think ever really truly goes to the back burner. I have a writing journal, which is my journal for ideas. I jot ideas down in it. And sometimes it's just a log line, as they say, that's like that describes what your screenplay is about. Sometimes it will start, for me, I'm character driven. So I start with characters that interest me more than the plot. Like, do I like this character? Is this somebody I really, really like, or is it somebody really high? And do they interest me? And so I have done that. And I would say in recent years, which it's a struggle. I'm a mom. I have a full-time job. I have other commitments out of work. My kids are
How
in
old are your
activity.
kids?
They're 8.
Aaliyah? Okay.
8.
Okay.
So
twins, yeah, right?
Yes, twins, a boy and a girl, Akila and Zach. And they have their interests, and I'm trying to foster what they're interested in. So it's trying to find the time to do that. But again, I tell stories, and I'm looking to tell stories. And I would say right now, my struggle is, as a screenwriter, is making more time to do this. And I think one of the things I learned from this most recent project is, it was a dual focus. So I had my work life, I had my family life, and I had this screenplay that I had to write. So sometimes it's the pressure of outside forces coming in, because I had to get it done. We had a timetable that we had to tell these stories. And I think I need more pressure like that to force me to write more.
But you make a great point about these projects that you need, these skills, these passions that you need. People always ask me, how do you do this podcast? How are you coaching? And you have like 3 kids at home and your full-time job. Like, no one believes I have a full-time job with everything that I try to put out there. And it's like, you know how it is. Like, when you have that passion, it's like, okay, I'll do the full-time job. I'll handle the kids, spouse, spend as much time as I need, but whatever ounce of energy that I have left has to go to this. You're just drawn to it. It can be tedious sometimes and frustrating, maybe overthinking things, but you're just drawn to these passions, especially as a creative. Because I'm always curious, maybe you can answer it from a director's standpoint, or all the many hats you've worn. It's like, I always wonder how much an artist had to listen to a song to say, okay, I'm happy with it. And like you said, after the fact, they're like, I wish I had done this or that, or this. What did that look like for you? Did you torture yourself towards the end when you're like, okay, we need to do this? I mean, it's not like you had a major budget for reshoots and whatnot, but what did that look like, fine tuning that product that you wanted to put out there?
You work closely with the editor, and the editor, I always say, is the magic man or woman. and they will be honest with you. They're like, here's what I can do. Here's how I can fix this, and here's how I can't fix it.
It's amazing.
And
it's just amazing how much of all of that we take for granted. We stream a movie, we go to the movie theater, but we see, maybe we stick through all the credits at the end, right? And yours is a smaller production, so it doesn't have that much. But it's amazing how much we take for granted what goes into a movie.
Oh yeah, it's such I can't even say how much of a collaborative effort it is. It's really, when you make a film, when you make or if you do a stage production, if you write a play, it really becomes a second family. Excuse me. And it's a collaborative effort, because one of the things that I think you start to find through the process, excuse me, I'm going to just grab a cup.
Absolutely, no, do what you need.
Is that there are things that as a writer, you may come into a story with and expectations that you have, but the story will grow outside of you because of the input from others. And I think that's a good thing. I believe in the diversity of thought. I believe more voices make things better. And, sometimes creatives also have tunnel vision and you
Mm.
see what you want to see, not necessarily what you always should see. And I think with film, having others come in to assist and to help you tell your story, that's where the rubber meets the road, as they say, but that's where it also flourishes
Yeah.
because other people's buy-in and weigh-in, it helps. It helps you reimagine your story.
Yeah, because as much as these things, whether it's a book, a script, a podcast, as much as these things are labors of love, you also want to make sure as much passion as you're pouring in from your side, that it is going to land and connect with people on the other side. So if there is somebody that can tell you, hey, maybe do this and we'll understand it a little better, it'll flow a little better. I can see that power of collaboration, that diversity, having your own focus group or different positions to look at your projects and how important that is.
Yeah, and I would say with I am Muslim from the beginning, and I am American, we started out with interviews. So part of this was for me to have an understanding. So while I'm not a Muslim American per se, I'm married to one. My husband's a Muslim American. I have Muslim American folks in my family. And I think as a person of color, uh, I've had some experiences that not necessarily directly parallel, but positions me as kind of what it's like to be the other
Mm,
in
yeah.
our world. And for this project, it was important to hear stories of Muslim Americans. And we started that with our network. We started that, and I want to credit Halima Flynn. She's a co-partner of mine in another area. We have a group called the Producers that we started eons ago. But I Am Muslim is a part of that. Uh, she brought me into this project. She's a Muslim American, and she had a connection in New Haven that was saying, "Hey, could you guys do these interviews? What's your network like?" So it began, excuse me, from a holistic process of here's this topic. What would you guys bring to it? What do you think this project can be? And it went through a lot of different iterations. We started doing the interviews back in 2021, during COVID.
Mm,
Um, the project it went through a lot of iterations of what it was going to be. In the end, it settled on a film. Initially, it was supposed to be part of multimedia. So part of this was originally imagined to be a stage production.
oh wow.
Um, and then part of it was going to be a film. But just due to budget, due to time, we had to sort of condense that. And we came to the point where we're going to make this a film. And we're going to make this a script, and we're going to convert these stories that we heard, which I think is tricky, and I hope I did folks justice. But listening to a lot of different stories and trying to figure out what a thread line is amongst the different stories that we heard, and how can we most effectively visually tell this, because it's important. And I think that from the position of Longworth, I would say, and I think the Doris Duke Foundation is, the goal was to help facilitate conversations, to see this film and to be open to a conversation, be
Yeah.
open to learning. I think when I think about myself as a storyteller, one of the reasons I love telling stories is because it's a way to engage another individual. When you see a story, when you see a commercial, and it has an impact on you, it's a way to open the door to press pause and put aside whatever your biases may be or whatever your opinion point of view is, and hear someone else's voice to give you an opportunity to think. And this film and script was made with that in mind. How can we open up people to just listen?
Aaliyah, before we jump into the screenplay and the film, so you went to school for a communications related undergraduate and then you did the MFA later. What kind of work were you doing from then to now? What kind of communications work? What did some of those career changes or jobs look like?
Oh, well, at the time I started my MFA, I was at an organization called Casey Family Services, which did um, advocacy work and did placement for kids in foster care and adoption. It was partnered with the Annie E. Casey Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
So I was there at the time and I was a public relations specialist. So really working and learning about advocacy. What does
Yeah.
it mean to advocate? How do you advocate for a specific issue? Um, there are over 500,000 kids in our foster care system across the United States. And so a lot of my job was helping to tell that story. What does that look like nationally? But we're here in Connecticut. What does that look like locally for kids in Connecticut? What are some of the services that they're not getting as a result of being in foster care? And also, too, how resilient these young people are, but they have a lot of, unfortunately, trauma. And how do we address that holistically and systemically with our systems? And that was mind opening for me. Again, I think a lot of stuff that I probably come to because I have an interest to it, or it just opens me up to a new possibility. Before I took that job at the Annie E. Casey Foundation, I was not aware. And I think that's good for me because I learn and I open myself up to topics that I didn't know. And I think that's important for a communicator. But I learned a lot and was just like, wow, this is happening. Here's an organization that is very passionate, very diligent about making change. And I can be one of those messengers to help them do that. And so, again, I think I started that job and it wasn't a full-time job. I was kind of like a PA and they had all these videos and they were like, we need someone to organize and log our tapes and tell us what's on these tapes because we want to use some of this information for future commercials, for, to historically archive. So that I wasn't even a public relations person at the time. I came in looking for, I needed a job, and this was a way for me to use my video production skills. So I really learned about the organization by watching a lot of interviews, watching people tell their stories. And when there was a job opportunity that came up where they were looking for a PR specialist, I said, well, I went to college for communications. I know kind of what PR is. And
Yeah.
and because I think I was working for them about 6 months in that role, I got to understand and know the organization. So I think, as they say, the stars aligned and I
Mm-hmm.
ended up getting that position. And it was really good for me. I was with the organization for about 7 years. They ended up phasing out Casey Family Programs as a formally, and then took like the work and things that they learned from that and went more with the national. But if I was going to have stayed with the organization, I would have had to move to Baltimore, which I just wasn't ready to do at the time. Like, I love to travel, but I'm like, Connecticut's my home.
Yeah.
I still feel that way. And so I ended up getting a different communications position, and and eventually pivoted to working for a utility company. At the time, it was UIL Holding. Now it's Avangrid, I believe. But I worked for their corporate communications department, and that was a mix of public relations. Again, I had to learn a whole different field. I had never worked for a utility company before, which was a combination of gas and electric. Very different worlds. So I had to, but I know how to communicate. I know how to tell stories. And so, again, this was an opportunity for me to learn about a different field, a different area of thought, and how an organization does that. And again, that was a mix of internal and external communications. So everything from when there's a gas leak and you're getting your local call from the reporter, what's happening, how you tell that story, how you deal with it, and how it's going to be resolved, to doing some stuff that I think I still do today, which is employee stories, talking about the employees, the people who make the company, people who make the organization. One of the things that I liked about that job when I did the employee stories, I got a chance to go out and meet the linemen who are fixing the lines when serious storms happen, and even when a serious storms happens, how the whole company has to come on board to be able to manage what the messaging is, how timely we're being responsible to lines down when that happens. So it's definitely an interesting everything from and I think as communicators, which you don't necessarily think about going into communications, but organizations have events, how you're doing employee events to engage employees, to keep them motivated. So I did a lot of that work too, and have always liked that work because it's a different way to tell a story to different groups. But planning conferences, listening to speakers who are experts on a topic, I've been able to do a lot of that and learn from really other, I would say, great communicators in this role of being an internal communications professional as well as external.
That's amazing. And what's amazing about talking about storytelling here with you is that my appreciation for storytelling took off because of the work that we did at the American Marketing Association. Obviously, you have this deep, rich history in PR and communications at various organizations. That was my first foray into anything communications, in all honesty. So that was like the first time I really appreciated just the story and just saying, okay, this is an organization that we trust, that we enjoy working with, that's doing great work. How do we get that messaging out there? All of this came out of that, just that appreciation when I was hosting those events for the AMA, just being able to draw out information in somebody's story. And we were limited to like particular questions, to hit the audience with the value of that person's knowledge. But it's just incredible how like the pen truly is mightier than the sword. It's amazing. I love the fact that you can take your set of skills, and it would help if you had some knowledge of the organization, but you don't need the knowledge of the organization as long as you have that curiosity to meet the people behind the scenes, understand the mission, understand its history, but then take this set of tools and abilities that you have to put that together, package it for them to understand internally, and then all the stakeholders in that community. So I think it's just sharing this with you and our experience in the AMA has just opened my eyes to just how powerful storytelling is. I just have a deep appreciation for it. If somebody had told me that that's what communications was, like I had no idea when I was a kid. I figured it was just like my friends that are in communications, they want to be like behind an anchor desk and that's it. But I didn't know about the possibilities. I was just a kid at that point, but there's just so much value in just sharing and understanding who we all are, what we do, and what we can bring to the table. It's incredible. Yeah. It's incredible.
And I think it can start there because I think what you know is what you see. And growing up a lot, I watched a lot of television. So again, that's my focal point in my introduction to storytelling. I was definitely more of a kid who watched TV than read books. As an adult, I'm trying to change that because I believe in the power that books and words have.
Yeah.
But, I got engaged through television. And I think, when you study something, when you learn something, there's just so many different venues. And I think what's really cool and interesting about where we are today in our current media landscape, there's multiple intersections. And I think, if you look, authors have to talk about their books. They're probably going to have to do interviews. So while they may write, there's a form of marketing that you have to communicate this. And, from everything from what we're doing today to a podcast, you still got to have a press release. You still have to sometimes, in many cases, it's not completely dead, but you got to have your media kit for your project. And I've been blessed in my career to have worked at organizations where I've learned from, I think, a lot of different people. But there is no, I want to say to those out there, there's no one way to tell a story. Obviously, you have to master, the rules to the road for your genre and learn that. But when you know the rules, and you're pretty good at what you do, you can figure out how you break those rules to do what you need to do. And I think for my approaches, I still have to, I still got two kids I have to send to college. I still got bills to pay. So, for me right now, I still need that 9 to 5 job. But what I love about my 9 to 5 job is like, I get to be creative. I get to help them tell their story. Right now, we're doing some cool stuff where we're just getting ready to launch. We started already. My video was the first one, but a day in the life series where
I saw that. Yep.
we're looking at our asking our employees to talk about what it is we do, because what we do, believe it or not, it helps impact change. It's important. And we think the public should be aware of it. So we're telling that stories, and I'm getting to tell videos, and I'm writing, shorter scripts to do that and helping other teams. But that brings me back to what I studied 20 plus years ago, video production. We have a camera. A lot of it, we're doing it with this right here, our smartphone. So again, the power for people to tell stories, it's in the power of your hands now. But I think what you still have to do is think about your audience. That stuff doesn't change. And to think about when the story is done, whatever form it may take, how are you going to market it? How are you going to get it out there? And what's important about it?
I think it goes even further back than that. You know what I mean? Like you mentioned, how are you going to tell it? What are you going to do for what are you going to share with the audience and whatnot? It's incredible just in working on this series and working in my leadership coaching and just listening to other people, myself sharing more about myself. It's incredible how before we may know the tools to tell the story and how to target that story, most of us don't even know our story. You know what I mean? We've gone through life, we've reacted, but most people can't. They really can't sit down and tell you, okay, this is that. This is what I've gone through. This is what made me. These were my experiences. We're bad at storytelling. We're bad at sharing. So it's like even before those, not all of us, I'm still working on it myself. But even before we get to those tools and those mechanisms that technology provides and so on and so forth, it's amazing how many people don't know their story or don't know that they can share their story, that their story is worth it. I've met so many people through coaching, even young kids, and I mean at that age, they're not going to know the value in their story, but they've essentially said to me, "I don't have anything to offer employers." And then I ask them, tell me about your life. Tell me what you're up to. And they'll say, one was like, oh, I'm captain of the baseball team. We practice twice a day. We got to keep our academics off. It's like, dude, you don't know your own story and what kind of value that brings forward. So it's incredible. I mean, my plea to people is just to consider what their story is and how valuable it is. Because I think that's what gets us in trouble is we don't turn back and really consider how far we've come.
No, I think that's very true. One of the things I will also I have to shout out. Part of a screenwriters group, the Connecticut Screenwriters. We meet monthly in West Hartford at the West Hartford Public Library over there in Blueback Square. And I've been on and off with them for years, and I'm back on. I want to say, I think I got back. I think I started with them back in like 2008 or 2009, and when I was working on my my first film, my short film that I did in other scripts before then, I was pretty active. And then again, as I had a family and kids, I sort of fell out. And I recently came back to them. I want to say, I think about 3 years ago. I think around COVID is when I actually got back in, and I've been meeting with them for a regular basis. And I think that's a point to mention too for people who are creative, who are writers, finding a community of writers who understand your work ethic, understand what you're trying to do, are doing it themselves, and kind of having similar struggles. And we're a group of all levels of screenwriting. Some of us have agents. Some of us are working on our first script. Some of us are in and out of it as we can be. But it's a consistent group, and I've been meeting with them. And honestly, it's encouraging. To your point, I completely agree with you. A lot of us don't know our stories or don't know the stories that we have and how the value it can add. And even me, from just going to that screenwriting group that meets monthly, I learned so much from technique. I'm a definitely a better editor of others than I am of my own work. I have work to do, with even just the little things of, grammar, proofing and that stuff. But when you read someone else's stories, when you read someone else's words, you put a whole sort of different lens and mindset. And when you know that they're coming to you for feedback to figure out how can I make this better? Because I want to get this in front of an agent. I want to submit this to a screenwriting contest, something along those lines. And so we meet and we share, and you learn so much from that process. So I just want to mention them because they are part of my process right now. And early iterations of the story, I shared with it, and it went through quite a few different phases. Yeah. And I got that feedback that was like, this works. This is what we're hearing. This what doesn't work. And you need that as a creative too. You need that as a writer and a storyteller, to have a close community that you can trust, to be candid with you, to be truthful with you about your work.
Yeah, a trusted community where everybody's kind of working in the same direction. They don't have to have the cookie cutter goal. But again, that group, I mean, all their screenplays are probably going in different directions, different themes. But yeah, a trusted source, a trusted group that wants to grow in a positive direction. They want to work. They want to be honest with each other, not somebody that's going to, based out of ego, tear you down because it may make them feel like they have more power. But I think it's also important for people to look for other people out there trying to, again, work in the same direction, not have the same thoughts as you, not have the same ideas as you, but just that same mindset of just growth and getting better.
Yes, that's essential. And for me, I don't get upset when other people are achieving. I'm like, it makes me happy because I'm like, you've given me an idea for a roadmap. I'm seeing a route that you're pursuing, and I may not be at that level necessarily yet, or I may not have those contexts, but I learn from others. I'm always learning from others. And when you're part of groups and when you grow your network to have people who have different skill sets from you, and in some places, I've been able to help others who are not necessarily where I'm at. In my network, I have people who are a little bit ahead of me in the game, who are out there pitching their scripts, who actually have an agent. And for me, that's great because we can have conversations about, here's what you need to do when you get in that room. When you actually have the opportunity to pitch, here's what's going to work. And you can practice pitching with them. There's others. I was at when I went to the International Black and Diversity Film Festival, I was at a table with a young man who won his first award. He directed a short film. He was probably 23, 24, 25. You're talking, I'm introducing myself. He's introducing himself. And I said, how are you going to promote this film afterwards? What are you doing to help make sure this isn't the last stop that you have on the process? And he said, I don't know. I said, well, we're going to have to talk because here's some ideas I have for you. I said, here's what I think you should do. And we connected on LinkedIn. And I shared some of, what I did early in career. Here's some things that you can think about from a marketing perspective to continue to market your film. And I gave him some tips. I said, no one's going to tell your story better than you. So you have to be out there telling your story. I said, get a list of all local media. He's an African-American young writer director. So I said, search out podcasts, search out local media if they're still print media. And I said, you're going to have to write your own press release. And once you find and have a contact name, you tell them you won this award. You break it down, the who, what, when, where, and why, and how, which is the basics to writing, right? But you tell that story. And I said, and I'm going to have to follow up with him because I haven't heard from him in a few weeks, but I want to see who he's outreached to and has he gotten any more traction. But to me, it's like, why am I going to keep that to myself? He's a young director early in career. I think he was like 23, 24, 25, one of the somewhere around that range. Yeah. And that's an exciting time. You finished the film, like, congratulations. And so for me, it's not just about, how I'm helping myself. In order to do this work and to, I think, be effective, how are we helping others? how is our story going to improve other people's lives? And I think for me, I think that's why I fell into communications, because it's not just about me. And when you are a storyteller, when you are communications, whether that be a specialist, a director, leading a team, it's never just about you.
So where did you pick that up from, or is it innate to you? When do you, as far back as you can remember, when did you feel you had that perspective, that mentality, that about helping others? You know, because some people, the industry can be very cutthroat.
Mhm.
Maybe it's evolving, but where did that come from in you in terms of helping others and feeling good about helping others, doing what you can for your community? Was that modeled for you? Was it just natural for you?
I think it was definitely modeled for me. I definitely have an innate nature where I lead with kindness and I lead with helping others. I think empathy and having it has been a big person of who I am. I'm an emotional person. I'm that girl who cried when Simba lost his dad. When you watch The Lion King, like that's
Who
me.
did it? That's like, if there
You
was
know,
ever a marker in my history where like my heart was broken, that was like my first heartbreak, was seeing that scene.
yeah.
You
And
know what I
then
mean?
he thinks he's responsible for he
Oh,
thinks he's
I
responsible.
can't.
So like emotion drives me, and I think I've always kind of been, I think, a helpful person and wanting to learn and always being of service to others. I think I first volunteered. I used to go to an organization at the time that was called the Waterbury Girls Club. Now it's officially known as Girls Inc., which is a national chain that's focused on helping young girls.
Yep.
And I grew up in that organization, and I did everything there from like taking cooking classes. I did gymnastics there. I learned how to sew there, and I
Right.
remember I think I probably started cooking classes when I was like probably 6 or 7. By the time I was 8 or 9, I was a volunteer helping the instructor.
Oh,
Work.
wow.
Yeah. And so I've always had an interest in learning, and I think that's important. You have to have curiosity. You have to be curious, because I say sometimes, in our worlds, it's not always fair. The best person doesn't always get the job.
Yeah.
But one of the things that's been helpful to me is I've been willing to work, and I've been curious. And if it's something I didn't know, I'm going to learn about it. I'm going to find out about it. I'm going to know it backwards and frontwards. And then because I'm a communicator, I'm going to be able to talk about it effectively. So I've kind of been doing that since I was a kid. And I
Hmm.
think over time, I've been blessed with people who've helped hone that, people who've seen it out in me. And it's not always been, I would say, some of it has been some of my educators, not always. Some of it's been my coaches. Some of it's been people who I volunteered with it. Some of it's been family members who've encouraged. But I kind of recognized it as like, I want to say, a superpower for me,
Mm.
because I recognize when others don't do it. And again, like from my vantage point, you got to figure out a way you can get in and fit in. And what is someone else not doing that you could be doing?
I should add that question to my questions for this series. What's your superpower? Because I've had conversations this week about that. Yeah, I think that's interesting when somebody can, I don't think it's ego at all. Somebody can say, this is what I'm good at. Like, this is what I stand behind. This is where I bring in the value. So I think I'm going to add it to my list. Aaliyah,
Good.
something I always ask, and you've heard it before, is, and you've spoken to it. You spoke to it about dancing at 5 years old. You just spoke to it about bringing things forward from your childhood. But my question always comes up about childhood. Does it make sense from your childhood and your personality then that this is the work you're doing now? How does that reconcile? So, although you've spoken a lot of that, how do you put that into words specifically? What more would you add to it to reconcile who you were as a kid and the work you're doing now? Does it make sense? Does it not?
I think it does. I think when I was in high school, and I was thinking about communication seriously as a career, I was like, it's going to be something in communications. And I think, latched on to broadcast journalism. At the time, Oprah was the big thing. And she was, breaking barriers like nobody's business. So I initially wanted to be the next Oprah, which you can't be the next Oprah. Oprah is Oprah, right? But
Yeah.
What she did, how she disrupted, how she changed the game was, there's still case studies in communication schools looking at how she changed the game and what you can learn from her approach, her aesthetic, her ethic. So, I wanted to be there, but in a way, I kind of am. I am reconciled with where I'm at. I also believe, I think I probably missed some opportunities. You know what I mean? I missed opportunities, or I didn't capitalize on opportunities that I think I could have, right? And you, as they say, you can't have regrets because you're here where you're at right now. And I think the person I am right now is definitely the kid is the kid I was. I was a talkative kid. That was one of the things when I was 3 years old. And I don't have too many memories from when I was 3, but I was in preschool. I was the girl who was disrupting kids at nap time because I was talking. And my mom was getting reports like, Aaliyah does not take her naps. She needs to take her naps. Fast forward, and I've always been a sort of a chatty Cathy, and that's been a strength of mine, but it's also been a place where I need to kind of grow from and figure how to make it work better for me. Yeah. And when I was, I want to say, when I was in high school, I got the high school accolade of Team Chatterbox or High School Chatterbox. I forget what it was, but again, still talking, still being, people recognize I'm the person to go to when you need to find the story. What happened? Who did what? That was me. And I think when I got to college, I realized, okay, yes, you are a communicator, but let's figure out how you hone this. How are you going to make a career out of this? And what does that look like? And it looks like a lot of different things. And I think even in my next 20 years, I have an idea of where I want my career to go, but I don't think there's any one path to it. I think there's a variety of paths, and I think it's going to depend on, the time I have, where my focus changes, and even how my interests change. And I think that's the difference. I think you can have a set of ideals and have hopes, but reality will hit. What's the likelihood of what you can do? What's the time that you have to do this? And so that's kind of my guiding post today.
I love that. Yeah, I love because I've mentioned it in this conversation and in others where it's kind of like, if you know that you have a specific goal, great. But if you've realized that life is just going to hand you whatever it wants to hand you, but what you just said is like, I have these values. So wherever I go, I'm going to bring them with me. So I think where in the past we may have seen like one path to success, whatever our success is. But now when we learn that it's like whatever comes from within us, wherever we bring that, we're going to make it what we can. That's such a valuable message.
Yeah. And I think what I like about where our media landscape is today and what I think is positive is there are images that I see today that when I was a 5-year-old girl, I didn't see. When I was a 10-year-old girl, I didn't see. And even when I was 18, graduated from high school, the potential of what you can be, what you can say, and what you can do is different. And I definitely want to be a part of that narrative and that change for other young creators, other young writers, and not necessarily, even if you're not a communicator, do you see people who look like you? Because that's important. Again, I think when I was growing up, Gail King was around. She was a local anchor at WFSB, Channel 3.
Yep.
And she was it. She is the only communicator other than Oprah who I knew that was a Black woman. When I grew up, my first African-American teacher, the first time I saw a Black teacher, I was in 5th grade. So I think now that is significantly different. I think, you can see that on LinkedIn, you can see that on our media, and I think that's a good thing. But I think we still have to encourage young people who don't necessarily see themselves in these roles or even think it's possible. Part of what I want to do with my work and my storytelling is making sure the next generation has the tools and has the ability to hopefully do what I'm doing and do better than what I'm doing. That's what I want. That's what I want for my kids.
Yeah, well, that's the problem with the double-edged sword. You have all this media, all this access to people of all colors, people of color, and you see more and more of their prominence, right? Specifically, people of color now, more and more of their prominence. But with that technology comes so many other distractions. You know what I mean? It's not like when I was growing up, maybe when you were growing up, like we had like 13 channels.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? 13 channels. It's not like you're seeing a black person or a brown person on one of 13 colors. Now it's like there's just so much. It's overstimulating. But you're right. I mean, just the fact if they can learn the power that they have, the power of their creativity, their storytelling, and the tools that they have at their disposal, they can raise that ratio of representation and really show what, trailblazers like Oprah, Gail, and you
Thank
are
you.
showing them. You know what I mean? Like just that creative spirit, that storytelling spirit. You have an idea, write it out, screenplay, production, with a powerful message. So I mean, that's great that they have someone like you to look up to.
Thank you. And yeah, I think that's where, I still have a lot of, I think, stories to tell. And I think, over these next, I would say 5 years, I'm definitely want to spend more time writing, writing these stories and getting them out there and seeing where it catches traction, where it could be of value. And so I know I'm definitely going to focus on that. But it's, I have to, I think, take pause and sometimes not. I don't think when you're a creative person, when you're in it in the daily day, to realize actually what you've accomplished. And I'm not necessarily really good at that. I think we're so caught into trying to go to what the next thing is. But I think kind of recognizing like my own journey and where I've come and honestly being proud of what I've been doing to this
Yeah,
point.
absolutely. No one should lose sight of that. So speaking of your leadership, what does leadership mean to you? I got to
Uh,
ask. I mean,
yeah, no. I think for me, leadership is leading by example. You have to walk the walk. And I've had some really good leaders in my career, and and they're very different leadership styles. So I have had some very different leadership styles, but the one thing that is consistent amongst the best leaders who've helped influence me is they lead by example. They would never do anything and ask of anything of their other employees, of their direct reports, that they wouldn't do themselves. And I have to say, not all of my leaders have been communications folks, but they all recognize the importance of a good story and telling a good story and why we have to tell good stories. So all of the leaders that I look up to, who've inspired me, to this day, even though I don't work for them, but I still keep tabs on them via social media, whether it be Facebook or LinkedIn, is, and they're still leading. And they recognize a core principle of effective and good storytelling and why that matters. I'm going to quickly shout out Ted Fleming. He was my boss back when I worked at Aetna and actually brought me on to his team. Like created a role for a community online community specialist to help his department. At the time it was Aetna University.
yeah.
Within Aetna, and I learned so much from him. And he's very detail oriented, organized, will push you hard, but again, he wouldn't do anything that he hasn't either done himself. And a leader knowing your potential and making sure that you reach it.
Yeah. No, I'm all about the shout outs. I think those people that make a difference in someone's life, and that's, to me, that's not hyperbole. when they say, or when I say, it makes a difference in someone's life, what happens to you at work impacts you outside of work. So if you have a toxic boss, a toxic leader, a toxic manager, that energy just follows you home. So if you have somebody that it doesn't have to be toxic positivity, positive all the time, whatnot, for positivity's sake, but somebody that really is a builder of people, a multiplier of leaders, somebody that sees your potential, somebody that does walk that walk. I mean, anytime you can shout them out, give them a thanks for just the legacy that they leave behind them and the ripple effect that they have on the people that they work with and for and serve. I think they all deserve shout outs because it is very rare to find someone that you would shout out. You know what I mean? You have good bosses, but to have those people that really stand out is few and far between.
And I think one of the things that we may not always think about as storytellers, and one of the things that I would say Ted imparted onto me is, there's the business of the art form that we do, or behind, and there's metrics that you need to deliver on or that you need to be measured by, qualitative and quantitative. And I think one of the things that he helped me to focus more on and understand, about impact and value and how you're adding it to an organization is, how are you measuring what you do? Like, now I bring that lens to my work, and I think even if you write a book, what's the quantitative you're focusing on? How many books are you going to sell? How many people are going to, look at the social media post that's promoting your book? What's your conversion going to be on the clicks to the links, whether it be Amazon or whatever other platform? And Ted helped me understand why that's important. He helped me understand why other leaders, especially when you're in sort of the corporate Fortune 500 field, and you have shareholders and all of that good stuff, why that matters, why numbers are important. Mm-hmm. So while I obviously love the creative, one of the things that I wear now and I think about now, when I put stuff out, whether it be for CROG or for myself, is how am I measuring it? How am I demonstrating impact? And I think that's the business part that I don't think we necessarily always learn when you're even coming up through formal vehicles of communications, university and that. But that's the practicality that you have to also think about as a storyteller, as a creative, as a writer. How are you going to measure your impact? How are you going to measure your influence? And there's a lot of different ways to do that. And again, you want to go back to, your goals. What's your strategic, your strategy. And I think, good leaders will teach you how to think about and break it down, break strategy down, and break impact down.
Absolutely. I mean, you want to make sure you're effective. You want to make sure you're not using your resources on an effort that's not going to pan out even a little bit. So I appreciate that response. Aaliyah, we can jump into the screenplay now. You'd gone a little bit into it, how it was supposed to start off as a play, that there were interviews involved, but can you give a little background on, how the screenplay came to be?
Yeah, so this project was not my brainchild. I was brought into it by my friend Halima Thun. We worked together previously, and we kind of always stayed in touch. We're big into theater as well. And she had a contact, a woman by the name of Aaliyah, who at the time worked at Wharf. Unfortunately, she has since recently passed away, which really is... I'm still processing that. But for Aaliyah, this project through Halima was brought to us and said they're looking for locals, local talent, local creatives to work on this grant by the Doris Duke Foundation. We went through, a lot of things as you get approached to be on a project, from you getting approached to like it becoming your project. So, we went through all that. And then it was time where we have to get these interviews, and how even before we got to, who are we going to interview? We really thought about the mission statement from the Doris Duke Foundation and the goal of the New Haven Play Project, which is really centered around community and telling stories and bringing stories that are typically not told. So when we first looked at this project, the first thing I did before Halim and I sort of sat down for a brain session about strategically talking about how we approach this is I went and Googled um, Muslim Americans and was flabbergasted by what Google pulled up. A lot of it was terrorism. I can't even say terrorism. Um, and, we're in a post 9/11 world, and it was just negative.
Yeah.
I don't know how long it took me before I got to like positive stories. And a lot of this was driven by national media. But then I said, local stories. And those weren't that much better either. And so I was like a little bit sort of depleted emotionally from what I was seeing. So I was like, let me not look at news and articles. Let me look at images and see what images pull up. And it was a lot of the same. So really Islamophobic, very, I would say Middle East centric, that this is who Muslims are, which is not the case and not true. So that's where we started. And it kind of, I hate to say it, came from a little bit more of a negative place, but that's what I saw. And I said to Halima, you saw, did you, I did screen grabs. I sent her some article headlines. I sent her links to articles. I said, this is the narrative. And I said, this is at the time, this is 2021. I said, and we know Muslim people and the conversations we have with them, this is not what they're talking about. This is not who they see themselves to be. It's in complete contradiction. So we off the bat knew we had to go against what this was, because I think it's probably a little bit better if you search it today. If you search Muslim Americans, I think it's a little bit better, but it's still definitely not where it should be. And so the driving point of that was like Islamophobia. We're going to need to address that.
So, Aaliyah, when you've mentioned interviews, so was the format always supposed to be a collection of interviews? Is that what the original intent was?
Yeah. Because it's very, I would say, when Longworth approaches projects, they're very focused at the community level because most of their work is going out to their community. So they want people in the community to be able to relate to this. And I think when you talk to people at that community level, you're going to get different stories. And it's not going to be what like the national narrative is being said about a certain people or a certain group. And even like I said, when I have conversations with my own family members or, colleagues or family friends who may be Muslim Americans, this is, this narrative is not what I'm seeing. This is not what's happening in their everyday lives. And I think for when I think about stories that have impacted me, that I've been emotionally connected to, what is that day-to-day life experience? You know what I mean? What are you seeing? And I said, we need to have table talk conversation. And that's where we're going to, and I think when you have table talk conversation, you will get to both good and painful experiences in people's lives. But you have to, one, meet people where they're at. I think set some ground rules. So we had a bunch of different questions, and we structured those questions based on, different factors based on what we knew about the person we were interviewing. And a lot of it we sourced from our own network, which I think is helpful because I think people have a hesitancy, to your point that you spoke to earlier. We're not really good at telling our stories, and people don't believe their stories matter. And they're like, well, what do I say? How is that going to be used? There's a fear factor in there because there's a distrust based on how we've seen some media use people's stories. So even some of the people we interviewed, they had time, but even before we can sit down in the interview, we had to say, this is how we're using it. This is the frame for it. If folks had to sign releases and all that stuff, but you had to build trust before you can even sit down and be able to take in the conversation, because there is mistrust in the community about how people's stories are told, because they're not always told authentically or in a manner that really frames the conversation correctly. So we had to deal with that.
So how many people did you interview for the project?
I think We did probably around, I feel like maybe somewhere less than 20, but I think maybe around 15. And some of that came from my own family. And like, again, we had different styles. Like I interviewed my father-in-law, I've interviewed his wife. And that was kind of more, I would say, like a documentary style. We grabbed it because we knew we can grab it and participate, and it was easy to connect with them. We didn't necessarily use that in the film that you saw, but we did interviews like that. I reached out. My husband had some colleagues who had young teenage daughters, which their stories are very much a part of the film. They went to UConn, and I think I was really excited to interview with them because I think they represent the next generation of Muslim Americans.
Yeah.
And both of those girls were Indian Muslims, and a very different, I think, what I learned from them, a different experience. They're not U.S. citizens yet, but they're on that track to become U.S. citizens. And culturally, they define themselves like pretty much like they see themselves as Americans, even though they're not fully there yet. But culturally, they are. Both young women wear hijab, and to be able to tell that story and listen to them, it was really insightful. And there was quite a few different stories like that. But I did some interviews. Halima did some interviews. She's New Haven based, so she interviewed a lot of people from her network, from the mosque that she goes to, and connections that she was introduced. Either who currently live in New Haven or at some time did. So it was a mix. And then we were doing these interviews, and we sort of realized like it was very heavy women. A lot of the stories we were getting for women. So we needed to try to create some balance there. And we got to a point where we realized we were missing a few different points that we kind of wanted to cover. So when we and then you set up interviews, and you have these ideas to do these interviews, and you make the plans, and then for whatever reason they can't happen. So we had a lot of interviews too where we were hoping to get some key people, some politicians, elected officials, but just because of timing and things, we weren't able to get those. So that was all a part of the process. But I think the stories we got, I really liked. They said a lot of different things. I think that speak to the plethora of the Muslim American experience in this country. And that experience looks differently based on race, based on ethnicity, based on socioeconomic status. It's not the same. And that was important. But because we're women, I'm a girl, she, her. And that was an important narrative for us to tell too. And I think you probably get that from the film, that what is the experience of women who identify as Muslim in America.
Aaliyah, so when you spoke about interviewing, I think your father-in-law, you said that was more of a documentary style. So what's the rest of the film?
So that part didn't make it in, just based on the way that we approached it. So one of the things that I had to figure out as a writer is we have all these different stories. So the best way that we thought we can tell the story effectively, we went with a vignette approach, like, different vignettes of different stories. And what I did creatively was we had these different stories, but again, they had some central themes. I kind of did a blending of different stories, but we had different, we had heard this one story that was impactful to us about a young man who was kind of on the wrong track. Had his family was involved in criminal activity. He, by association, was getting involved in that criminal activity. But he had a teacher at the time, which was a woman I didn't interview, Halima interviewed her, who talked about how she interceded in this young man's life. And just by talking to him, by building trust, giving him advice, he found a way to break through those negative, bad connections. What she didn't know at the time, earlier on, is that he knew she was Muslim, and that while that wasn't her focal point, she didn't always lead with that, but he looked into Islam knowing that she was a Muslim. And that actually later in life, he went that path religiously, and converted to Islam, and they caught up later in life, and had that conversation that, you helped save my life. and because you were Muslim and the type of person you were and the type of values that you had, I on my own looked into it. And I think that, like, to me is powerful. Like, this kid was going through a lot of trauma in his life. And a teacher came into his life, and didn't say, "Hey, I'm Muslim," and da 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 da, but he saw her values. He saw how she carried herself, and again, how she talked to him. She humanized him. Other people in his life were not humanizing him at the time, and she broke that bridge. And so that's one of the stories, that we tell in the film. Others is, I think, that I feel resonated with me and made it in the film is just the other. Every day, I think you can kind of see in our media, and in our politics, if you don't fit the stereotypical version of what American looks like, which may be, I hate to say it, that sort of 1950, 60 version of blonde hair, blue eyes, white male, people may question if you are American in this country. And through most of our interviews, I don't think there was one person who didn't say that, which was important for us to get into the film. So that's a topic that we discussed. What's it like to be othered? If you happen to be a Muslim woman who decides to wear hijab, many people may have the perspective of, you're not American because you wear hijab. And I know that's probably crazy to say, but I've experienced it. I've seen it. And that was something, and I think what's universal about that is, for Muslim Americans, if you may identify and people can tell that you're Muslim, that's no different from, I think, how some Irish Americans may have felt when they lived in the Irish neighborhood, or Italians who at a time felt discrimination in this country because they weren't the norm. And so part of what we tried to do with this film, and hopefully universally connects, and we did some screenings with different groups. After this film came out last year, we did most of the screenings where people connected to that and recognized the othering of groups that we do. So those are some of the things that came out in the interviews, and I was happy to, when people saw it in the film, it worked for them. They saw it, they recognized it, and for when we screened it with non-Muslim audiences, how that connected to them, and the question was, how can we do better in our lives? That's and I think for me, this film works best when it is screened and you have a conversation about what you've seen and how it makes you feel.
Have you, I'm assuming you have done that. Have you done that a couple times, that kind of structure where?
Yeah, we did a few screenings. Last summer is when we finished the project, and Wharf did some screenings around that. I think I participated in, I think, 3 or 4 in each one. You definitely get a different, I would say, takeaway. We did it. I was at a screening where it was primarily a non-Muslim audience. It was, I think we went to a church on the coastline. I'm blanking on where it was, but it was a receptive audience. We screened it at a mosque in Farmington, which was a primarily Muslim audience. We screened it at one of the branches of the New Haven Public Library. I think that was my first screening, and that was a mixed audience, and a pretty good turnout. And again, I think it's always interesting to hear what people see and get. And one of in the New Haven audience, there was a woman who was a Jewish American, and I really appreciated her sort of take and her takeaways on what she got from the film, and what she candidly was, willing to share about what she took away from it. And I think, I would say one of the struggles is that, like everything, we're not telling one singular story. We're sharing stories of others. And hopefully I did my best job in trying to translate that to the screen. And I hope I, did it justice. but it doesn't make everybody happy. I know there was a screening that I wasn't able to attend because I think I was on vacation, where it was a little bit more of a conservative Muslim audience, and they had more issues with the film.
Oh, really?
Yeah, of their takeaways, and Halima's, position was, and I think it's, I would have taken the same position as, these are stories told to us. We've done a little bit of reimagining to them, but, you know, uh, it's, while we can see that you may, for how you practice, you may have disagreement with what's being seen. But again, this is how people are living their lives.
Yeah. Yeah, I was curious how you went about screening. But I think that's a great idea to have. I love that you screened it for different audiences throughout the state, mosque, Muslim community, not Muslim. Um, I love that you had that experience. I couldn't tell if it was a good experience, a bad experience with the Jewish American woman.
No, it was good.
Like,
It was
okay,
good.
okay. Only
She was
because
good.
there's just so many conversations, for instance, race, that just don't connect because people aren't allowed to ask questions about what they have no knowledge of, they have no experience of. Um, so I like the fact that you guys were open about that, because a lot of people don't want to step forward. They don't want to ask questions. They don't want to ask, quote, stupid questions. Um, and sometimes the people that are trying to educate don't know where to meet that person to continue that connection. So I like the fact that you keep that conversation open. I think that's the best way to do it, because if we expect people to come in with a complete knowledge, complete education, knowing the right questions to ask, not being able to ask uncomfortable questions, then it kind of gets lost, because we've built something for the area, the population that knows, that is familiar with what you're sharing, but the people that don't kind of feel left out. So it seems like you guys were very conscientious about sharing it across different demographics and groups. So I think that's a great value to it. Just so you can especially the topic of the film, the message of the film, trying to avoid the narrative that's on social media, that's on the internet when you type in Muslim American. So congrats to you guys.
Thank you. And one thing that I'll also articulate from a production standpoint, which for me as the writer was, I thought when I did my final script that I was done. Like, I'm like, okay, here's the shooting script. Here's the script that the actors are going to get. It's done. There were things that happened in that process that I just didn't anticipate. So we had locations picked, we had things picked, but this film was shot over 2 weekends. So it was shot within 2 weeks once we had a final script. And when you cast, we cast with non-union actors, but we had to find locations. It was all shot in New Haven. Actors have different schedules. So one thing that just sort of caught me off guard was I wrote one scene and the scene had 3 actors in it. Well, when they worked on the scheduling, all these 3 actors couldn't be in the scene at the same time. So at like 9 o'clock, I don't even know when I got the text or the email, but they're like, Aaliyah, call me. We have an issue. You're going to have to rewrite the scene, or we have to figure this out logistically. So with the Wharf team, with Halima, the director, we talked about it, and they're like, there's no way we can get these 3 actors at the same time. It's just not going to work. What are you going to do? I had to change the scene. I had to rewrite it. And I actually think it was rewritten better because we were forced to have to do it. But we took one of the actors who just couldn't be there. We took her out the scene. I took her out the scene, and I made it the scene between Father Pat and I'm blanking. I should know this, but the character, but my head's
That's
all
all right.
over places.
No worries.
But the scene was just the 2 of them, and initially
Okay.
it was the 3. It was the mother, Father Pat, and I can't believe I'm blanking on the actress's name, but that character. And so I did the scene. We just did the scene with the two of them because they could be there at that time. And I wasn't expecting to have to do that. And I had to, I think, write that. Like I got the call or I saw the text message at like 8. We had a call. I rewrote that scene. And I had to do it that night because they were shooting in like 2 days. So we had enough time, which was good. But still
Not ideal, but it worked out.
yeah, not ideal. And that is, and again, like I was as a writer, I thought I was done when the actors had their lines. And there was other instances. Another point to talk about going back to bringing the community in. Some of the characters are Spanish, Spanish speaking. And I wrote the scenes. I'm not Spanish. I don't speak Spanish, not a lot, Piquito. Through Duolingo, I'm trying to learn that in French. But they educated us, and the two actresses were like, when you come in a house that's bilingual in Spanish, we don't speak English in the house. We speak Spanish. So I'm going to greet my mother in Spanish. And they said, that's not how this is in the script. You probably should change that. And we were like, and we said, oh, okay. And so again, it's never ever final. It's constantly evolving. But that was a critique that we got from two of the actors who were Spanish speaking. And we were like, you know what? We have to run with that. So in the film, their lines when they're in the house, they're spoken in Spanish and it's translated at the bottom. But that was direct input from the actors. So again, you may write those words. I wrote those words, but the actors have to make it their own too. And there was a lot of variation of that happening throughout the process, which I think made the film better and made the script better.
Aaliyah, how long is the film?
It's with credits, it's about 45 minutes, almost.
Okay.
43, I think.
So do you show any of the interviews? Are they intercut in there? How does it?
No.
Or did you do the interviews and then take from those stories? And is it one story? Is it multiple stories playing out at once? How's the movie structured to kind of convey the message that you want to get across?
So we did the interviews, and even the interviews that we got on camera, we didn't use any of that.
Okay.
So we took our audio interviews that we recorded and I made that into short vignettes. So the film is basically 3 solid thread lines that you will watch.
Okay. Yeah, I was curious just how they played out. So my question, always with the book, but with this project for you, how did this change the way that you looked at the topic? I mean, in doing the research, you said you came across the Google search and all the negativity that's out there, but how did this project change you in the process of it? You mentioned some learning just based on going on the fly for rewrites and whatnot. Any other major changes or evolutions in the way that you looked at the topic, the way you see the topic, anything at all?
Yeah, I think it's better than it is probably a quick way to sum it up. So when I came into this, it was like I was just like, oh my God, the national narrative on Muslim Americans that people see, it's so bad. And I see why the Doris Duke Foundation and Wharf are looking to do, a project around this because we need it. What I think I got from the interviews and what I definitely got from the process is that it is better. Muslim Americans are having, it's not 100%. There's still discrimination. There's still Islamophobia. They still have struggles. I think, being a part of our American culture or trying to blend it, but it's not as bad as I thought. And I think that's a good thing. And I think I have to lean into that and see we are making progress, because I think it's easy to be distracted by a lot of our main media narratives that are out there that get propped up by certain, media outlets and certain channels. We, since I was a kid, negative sales, unfortunately, negative sales.
Yeah.
And, but what I learned from this film and doing it is that people still have hardships. People are still having trauma and it is impacting them, but they're finding a way. And
Yeah.
some of that goes down to the local community level. And maybe because of the work of others, of other generations, we don't necessarily always feel it or see it or acknowledge it when the older generation's work has helped. But one of the things that from the interviews with the two Indian sisters, they're young, they're in their 20s. They talked about when they were younger kids and they would fast for Ramadan, how nobody knew what that was, how
Mm.
how hard it was to kind of have to try to explain it. One of the sisters, fast forward, she's in college, she's up at UConn, she's working out, and after her workout, a fellow student comes up to her and is like, um, "Isn't it Ramadan?" And he's like, "You're at the gym working out during Ramadan?" And she was one like, "Wow, you actually know what Ramadan is." And it was a good conversation. She had a positive conversation, and somebody was actually giving her props, like, "I can't believe you're fasting and not eating from,
Yeah.
throughout the day, and you're here in the gym working out. Like, you get props for that." And that is a small story, but for a girl who, 10 years earlier in elementary school or middle school had people who didn't even know what it was, to someone kind of coming to her and saying, "Wow, good for you." And, I'm amazed by you. I think that's a cool thing. And that shows that progress can be had. The little things we do actually matter. And that's a story that's, it's switched up a bit, but that's a story that's in the film, and it had to get in the film because it can't always be gloom and doom. We have to be inspired. We
Yeah.
have to be able to show positive things, and positive things are happening in the community. There's a lot of interfaith dialogue that is happening in communities that wasn't happening even 5 years ago. And
And
there are,
you never really hear about that.
it's
You
happening
never
though.
I know, but you never really hear about it until it's like a sliver of the story that has to do with protests.
Yeah.
Everything that's going on in the Middle East now, there's the protests on this side, the protests from that side, and then there's a sliver of a story where there's a communication, a bringing of the two sides. It's incredible how you just don't see it that often. And yeah, we're not so naive to think that it's not happening, but that yeah, you don't think about it. It's the exception rather than the rule. You don't see it commonly across the TV. You're right, it's out there, but it's just a shame that you just don't hear about it that much. But what's good is I think you're right. It's amazing that you can kind of speak to that where you had one observation when you did started doing your research about what you saw online, and then you have that other kind of reassurance. Okay, it's not as bad as we thought. Those one-on-one stories, because mass media, it's going to show what sells, what's not working out, what's ugly, what's negative. But those one-on-one conversations, I think if you took so many of those people that were against each other based on what mass media is showing, and you sat them down, maybe with a mediator, maybe with somebody in the middle to like bring them together to have a conversation, I think it'd be incredible what you would get out of it. I think it's just we stay in those echo chambers and we miss out on that face-to-face communication and understanding.
Definitely. And one more thing that I'll say about the this process is we had film from as a part of the production staff as well as the cast. It was multi-ethnic. We had Muslim creatives a part of this. We had Jewish people on staff. We had people who identified as Catholic. One of my actors who plays a Muslim woman in the film, Melissa Lopez, she's actually she identifies as Catholic, but she took on this role, and shout out to her. And but that informed the filmmaking, acceptance. Not that we always have to agree, but the ability to understand.
Mhm.
Our assistant director, he's an Iraqi refugee who came to this country, and when he found out about the project in New Haven base, um, he wanted to be a part of it because he was like, I want to see more of these type of stories. So again, we had that sort of that type of energy, which
Mhm.
is important, and it was an energy that was fostered in diversity. It was inclusive. It was recognition and recognizing where people came from, and they were a part of this process. And I don't think I could have asked for a better cast and crew to help me tell my story.
Amazing. So what do you think, you've kind of referenced it a little, but what do you think is next for your writing? What do you think your major focus is? Where do you want to take that?
So I am submitting this project currently right now. We're still in film festival submissions. I've gotten a few rejections. That's part of the game that comes in it. I have a few more film festivals out there, so I'm hoping we get into one or two more film festivals, and that can give me an opportunity to talk about the film with newer audiences in different parts of the country. So fingers crossed on that. I think in terms of my next project, I want to focus on some feature length scripts. I say, like, my dream is to option something that I can sell to like a Netflix or an Amazon Prime. So I'm working on stories that are a little bit more commercial.
Mhm.
I would say that get to that. I have kind of sort of two paths. I'm looking at from a genre perspective, kind of like because it's an open market, and it's a selling market, is sort of your Hallmark type of movie style. Those are really popular. The
Oh
Christmas, the romantic,
boy.
yeah, yeah.
Oh boy. All right.
So,
Conversation's over. We gotta go.
so those are not necessarily,
I know. I know. I know.
but there's a market for it. So I'm thinking about tapping into that. But then, like, I have a script that I started about 2 years ago. It's called Patchwork, and it's about quilting. And
Wow.
it's yeah, I kind of got into it's weird how I
Is
came
it a
to it.
COVID thing?
It came in COVID, but more of um kind of went off of a book that was about a knitting circle, and that I feel like I think it got made into a film, and I was like, no one's really doing quilting. And so I have this idea about a woman who loses her husband, is really distraught, and her grandson introduces her to quilting. And so I'm going to work on that. And
Awesome.
that's a little bit of where it started. And I've gotten it started. I need to do more work on it. I need to outline it, and I think there's potential in it. I've done some research on it already. Like I'm kind of somewhat into quilting now. About a year ago, I went and took a quilting class, and bought some magazines, and I learned how to make a quilt to sort of again, I
That's
start from
awesome.
character. So there's going to be something coming from that in the future, and that's probably actually my next project that I'm gonna get serious and work on.
That's amazing. I love that you have a little mix of everything going on.
Yeah,
Aaliyah,
there's
just
no shortage of ideas. There's no shortage of ideas.
no, there isn't. There isn't. Which is incredible when you think of higher up the ladder, like Hollywood, just how much they reboot everything and they reuse ideas. I've always loved independent films because they're more character driven. You don't need the special effects. I mean, you have to go by conversation, what they're sharing. To me, they're more powerful, but that's just me. Aaliyah, in beginning to wrap up,
Mhm.
what book has inspired you or made an impact on you? Is there one that stands out? And you can't use the quilting book.
I wouldn't use that. Uh, I know why the cage bird sings.
Okay. Okay. Why? For
It's
you?
fiction. For me, it was again not an avid reader, and when I read this book, it hit me. Like, it hit me really hard. Um, I so connected to the characters. I so connected to the theme of the book. I still do. And I think the pain and struggle that we see. That book is probably, I think, 30 plus years old, but it's
Oh,
still
yeah.
so relevant today. And I think for me, it's written by an African American woman
Mhm.
that it was a trailblazer in her own right, and told really good stories. And I think it's a roadmap and a path that in some ways I kind of want to follow.
Yeah.
Not necessarily as a novelist, but I really like that book. And one of the things that I think for me, I come at work not only through character, but I try to bring history to what I do. And I think history is very important.
Mhm.
So for me, that book shows history, um, and you can honestly still relive that history in a way that still I think pulls at your heartstrings today. So yeah, I know why the cage bird sings.
Okay. And then when it comes to your screenplay, the film, what do you want people to take away? What's the major lesson you want people to take away from the film?
I think be open to listening. One of the things that I've learned as a communicator that has really been heavily reinforced to me over these last 5 years is the importance of actively listening. We do
Yeah.
not do it enough. And I think you hit across it earlier. There's a lot of distractions in our lives today, whether it be from our smartphones, just the pace of our work. We are always being pushed to the next goal, to the next thing that we have to do. Um, I'm reading a book right now called Deep Work.
Mm,
And that is helping me to think about pressing pause and thinking about how I spend time. But I would say actively listen to others in your lives. I actually just realized I have a meeting.
that's all right. That's all right. We're hopping off now.
Okay.
Is there anything else that you want to share? Anything at all before we
No,
go?
I think this was
Where
good.
where can people see the film, view the film, look into your work?
So we don't have the film on any channels right now because we're still pushing it out through the film festival circuit. If they come to my YouTube channel, they can see the trailer of the film.
Oh, okay,
And
cool.
I would encourage people to follow the Produce Hers on Facebook because anything that's happening with the film festivals and stuff like that, we're promoting it through that channel.
Amazing. And again, Aaliyah's script turned into a film. Aaliyah, one more thing. How do you pronounce the title? Do you say I am Muslim, I am American, or is it okay to say I am Muslim American?
I am Muslim American. That's how I would say the
Okay.
title.
Aaliyah, thank you so much for sitting down for this conversation.
Thank you so much, John. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your space. And I look forward to seeing you. Hopefully, we got to do coffee after this. We got to meet up in
Absolutely.
person. All right.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been a couple of years, been too long. If there's anything that I might have missed, please let me know. Reach out to me. I can ask Aaliyah to share additional information, insights, knowledge. In the meantime, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.
All right. Bye bye.